All right, we are on Genesis chapter 14, verse 17. Um, Only a couple left, 17 through 24 to complete chapter 14. Kim, are you up to reading?
Yes, I am. All right, verse 17. As Abram returned from his strike against Chedorlaomer and the other kings at the valley of Shaveh, later called King's Valley, the king of Sodom came out to meet him, and Melchizedek, the king of Salem, or Jerusalem, who was a priest of the God of highest heaven, brought him bread and wine. Then Melchizedek blessed Abram with this blessing: the blessing of the supreme God, creator of heaven and earth, be upon you, Abram, and blessed be God who has delivered your enemies over to you. Then Abram gave Melchizedek a tenth of all the loot. The king of Sodom told him, just give me back my people who were captured. Keep for yourself the booty stolen from my city. But Abram replied, I have solemnly promised Jehovah, the supreme God, creator of heaven and earth, that I will not take so much as a single thread from you, lest you say, Abram is rich because of what I gave him. All I accept is what these young men of mine have eaten, but give a share of the loot to Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, my allies.
This is one of the verses that people like to refer to about tithing, but Melchizedek did not request that Abram give him that 10%. Abram gave the 10% out of his own heart and desire, which is also what happens in the New Testament.
Yeah, right after the blessing.
Hmm. That came from his heart. Melchizedek didn't request it.
And
Um,
there's a whole lot of conversation about this Melchizedek and
mhm.
who he actually is and where he came from. And
Is there anything there you wanted to share or?
well, there's a footnote about him. It says, who was Melchizedek? He was obviously a godly man, for his name means King of Justice and King of Peace. That's referencing Hebrews 7:2. He was a priest of the God of highest heaven. He recognized God as creator of heaven and earth. What else is known about him? Four main theories have been suggested. One, Melchizedek was a respected king of that region. Abram was simply showing him the respect he deserved. Two, the name Melchizedek may have been a standing title for all the kings of Salem or Jerusalem. Three, Melchizedek was a type of Christ, Hebrews 7:3. A type is an Old Testament event or teaching that is so closely related to what Christ did that it illustrates a lesson about Christ. Hebrews 7 calls Melchizedek a type of Christ and discusses him in more detail. Or 4, Melchizedek was the appearance on earth of the pre-incarnate Christ in a temporary bodily form. Many scholars support this view. We've talked about him before,
We
probably
have.
when we
I
were
think in the
studying.
New Testament we were studying and looked him up. Um, Cindy, are you up to reading John?
Yes.
Okay, go
Hey,
ahead.
quickly before you start that, I
Yes.
just looked him up in this book of mine. And I don't know if we talked about this, but it says tradition of identifies Melchizedek as Shem, the son of Noah,
Hmm.
Genesis 11:11, or as Philistus, the builder of the Great Pyramid of Egypt.
There's also a whole write-up about him. It says he appeared one day in the life of Abram and was never heard from again. What happened that day, however, was to be remembered throughout history and eventually became a subject of the New Testament in Hebrews.
Well, I think it's
Um,
interesting that Abram, who was the father of the nations and also very wealthy, was submitting himself to Melchizedek. So I do feel like it's a like a type of Christ.
um, Also, it says Melchizedek was one of a small group of godly people throughout the Old Testament who came in contact with the Jews or Israelites, but were not Jews themselves. This seems to indicate that the requirement to be a follower of God is not genetic, to be a Jew or an Israelite. Instead, it means faithfully obeying his teachings and recognizing his greatness. So he was not an Israelite. He was a follower of God.
Let's see what our commentaries have to say.
Or 17, the Valley of Shaveh. The liberated king of Sodom went to meet Abram near Jerusalem. Verse 18, Melchizedek, king of Salem. The lack of biographical and genealogical particulars for this ruler, whose name meant righteous king, and who was a king priest over ancient Jerusalem, allowed for later revelation to use him as a type of Christ. There are references to Psalm and Hebrews.
Okay, now that king priest, didn't we read about that? When Jesus came, like the other kings could not be priests. And he was a king priest, and until Jesus came, Jesus fulfilled all the roles, the king and the priest.
I think you're right.
Yeah, it's kind of coming back to me.
His superior status in Abram's day is witnessed by 1, the king of Sodom, the first to meet Abram, returning in victory, deferring to Melchizedek before continuing with his request, and 2, Abram, without demur, both accepting a blessing from and also giving a tithe to this priest king, priest of Most High. The use of El Elyon, sovereign Lord, for God's name indicated that Melchizedek used this title 2 times, worshiped, served, and represented no Canaanite deity, but the same one whom Abram also called Yahweh El Elyon. That this was so is confirmed by the added description, possessor of heaven and earth, being used by both Abram and Melchizedek. Verse 20, who has delivered your enemies into your hand? Credit for victory over a superior military coalition correctly went to the sovereign Lord, El Elyon, and not to Abram's prowess.
So is he saying that the Hebrew word in 19 for God is this El Elyon?
Yes,
How is that spelled, please?
capital E-L,
Space?
and then a separate word, capital E-L-Y-O-N,
E-L-Y.
meaning sovereign Lord.
Thank you.
To Melchizedek and to Abram too, this amounted to the true worship of the true God. A tithe. This is the first mention in Scripture of giving 10%. This 10% offering was purely voluntary and may only have been a tenth of the best, not a tenth of the total. That this tenth is not like the required tenths given to Israel in the Mosaic law. And there are two references on that, Numbers and Deuteronomy. Verses 21 to 24. If Abram acceded to the king of Sodom's request, he would have allowed that wicked king to attribute Abram's wealth to the king's generosity, thus distorting the clear testimony of the Lord's blessings on his life. To accept such payment would belie his trust in God. Such a personal commitment would not be foisted upon his allies, who could make their own decisions. As for his own servants, their meals taken from the spoils was sufficient compensation. Undoubtedly, the servants remembered their master's reaction and testimony. It overcame much of the negative aspects in the memory of the earlier exit from Egypt. And that's it.
Any thoughts before Kathy starts reading? So I heard him say three things that Melchizedek meant, like the king of justice and peace, and then there was a third one that you just said.
The sovereign Lord?
No, for Melchizedek.
Oh, king priest.
Yeah, in 18,
His name means righteous king.
righteous king. Yeah. And then
Yeah.
also king of justice and king of peace. So that also sounds like Jesus. Justice, peace, and righteousness.
Okay, I'm not seeing justice, peace. Let me look.
It was early on. Maybe I had written, I wrote it today. Hebrews 7:2, king of justice and peace. Oh, it's referring to the Hebrews 7:2. Back in 18. Did he give a reference of that?
Yes, a reference to Hebrews 7, verses 17 and 21. And also to Psalm 110, verse 4.
Okay, so in Hebrews 7, if you go to verse 2, he's the king of righteousness and also the king of Salem and the king of peace, is a description in Hebrews 7. So the king of Salem also, which becomes Jerusalem.
It also says Melchizedek had no father or mother, and there is no record of any of his ancestors. He was never born and he never died, but his life is like that of the Son of God, a priest forever.
Yeah.
It describes a lot about Melchizedek in Hebrews 7.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure we studied him before. Isn't it interesting, like how if you're not in there all the time, it's like, oh yeah, that's familiar, but you start forgetting.
I remember that too, and I don't know where it was at, but I've no parents and no ancestors.
Mm-hmm. Maybe in Jude, I don't know. No, we didn't.
This bookline says, in a book consisting of genealogies, Melchizedek has no record of father, mother, birth, or death. Such silence is part of the divine plan to make him typify more strikingly the mystery of Christ's birth and the eternity of his priesthood.
Well, and if you continue in
We did
Hebrews,
talk about that.
I
yeah,
think we did in Hebrews.
Were we
Yeah, when
did
we
we
studied-
do Hebrews?
yeah.
Yeah, we did.
It says the old system of priesthood based on family lines was canceled because it didn't work. It was weak and useless for saving people. It never made anyone really right with God. But now we have a far better hope, for Christ makes us acceptable to God, and now we may draw near to him. I think that's why they parallel Melchizedek and Christ, because Christ would always be a priest, and Melchizedek, they're saying, was a priest forever.
I was just looking in this Holman real quick. How do you M-E-L?
Melchizedek.
M-E-L. This Holman says, personal name meaning Zedek is my king, or my king is righteousness. He was priest and king of Salem, a city identified with Jerusalem. When Abraham returned from the city of Siddim, where he defeated Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, the kings aligned with Chedorlaomer. Melchizedek greeted Abraham with bread and wine. He blessed Abraham in the name of God Most High, and in return, Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. Melchizedek and Abraham both worshipped the one true God. Abraham had also appeared to recognize the role of Melchizedek as a priest. That's interesting because he did recognize him as a priest. Psalm 110:4 refers to the one who would be forever a priest, or in the order of Melchizedek. This messianic psalm teaches that the leader or ruler of the Hebrew nation would be able to reflect in his person the role of priest as well as the role of king.
I have a footnote in for Hebrews that's kind of interesting. The writer of Hebrews used this story to show that there is someone greater than even Abraham, father of the Jewish nation, and Levi, Abraham's descendant. Therefore, the Jewish priesthood, made up of Levi's descendants, was inferior to Melchizedek's priesthood, in parentheses, a type of Christ's priesthood.
Yeah, it says for the writer of Hebrews, only Jesus, whose life could not be destroyed by death, fit the psalmist's description of a priest of the order of Melchizedek. So I guess he's saying it's like forward thinking to Jesus. Great, Kathy, whenever you're ready.
Okay, 17 to 24 is entitled Abraham the Worshipper. A new battle. Sometimes you face your greatest dangers after you have won a battle. It was after the capture of Jericho that Israel's self-confidence led it into defeat at Ai. And after his success on Mount Carmel, Elijah panicked and ran away in fear. No wonder saintly Scottish pastor Andrew Bonar said, "Let us be as watchful after the victory as before the battle." When Abraham returned from battle, he was met by two kings, Bera, king of Sodom, and Sodom means burning, and Melchizedek, king of Salem, and Salem means peace. Bera offered Abraham all the spoils in return for the people, while Melchizedek gave Abraham bread and wine. Abraham rejected Bera's offer, but accepted the bread and wine from Melchizedek and gave him tithes of the spoils. All of this is symbolic and presents some important spiritual truths that you should understand and apply today. Abraham had to choose between two kings who represented two opposite ways of life. Sodom was a wicked city, and Bera represented the dominion of this world system with its appeal to the flesh. Bera means gift, suggesting that the world bargains for your allegiance. But Sodom means burning, so be careful how you choose. If you bow down to Bera, everything you live for will burn up one day. That's what happened to Lot. Melchizedek means king of righteousness, and Salem means peace. Hebrews 7 and Psalm 110 both connect Melchizedek with Jesus Christ, the king of peace, and the king of righteousness. Like Melchizedek in Abraham's day, Jesus Christ is our King Priest in heaven, enabling us to enjoy righteousness and peace as we serve him. Certainly, we can see in the bread and wine a reminder of our Lord's death for us on the cross. So when Abraham rejected Bera and accepted Melchizedek, he was making a statement of faith, saying, "Take the world, but give me Jesus." Lot should have made the same decision, but he chose to return to his life of compromise. Why would it have been wrong for Abraham to take the spoils? After all, didn't he risk his life and the lives of his retainers to defeat the invading kings and rescue the prisoners? Legally, Abraham had every claim to the spoils, but morally they were out of bounds. Many things in this world are legal as far as courts are concerned, but morally wrong as far as God's people are concerned. Furthermore, before Abraham could take the spoils, he had to agree to restore the people of Sodom to their king, who said, "Give me the persons." Just as God wants to use human bodies for his glory, so the enemy wants to use human bodies for evil purposes. The enemy said, in effect, "Give me your body," to Joseph in Genesis 39 and Daniel in Daniel 1. But they said no. But when the enemy said the same to Samson, David, and Judas, they said yes. But what a price they paid. Abraham did not accept King Bera's offer. Instead, it is likely that Abraham gave everyone he had rescued opportunity to come with him and trust the true and living God. Abraham was a powerful sheik, and his neighbors knew about his tent and his altar, but there is no indication that any of them, including Lot's family, accepted his invitation. Except for Lot and two of his daughters, they all perished in the destruction of Sodom.
Well,
A
how do you
new
spell
blessing.
that king of Sodom? You're calling him Bera, Bera?
Bera. Yeah.
I don't know if I'm just a total like slow learner, but I don't think that I recognized, even as we were reading that Abraham was making a choice between the two kings.
No, I
And
didn't get that.
yeah, and then going back to yesterday, that Lot then rescued from Sodom that was evil, chose to choose Sodom over God again and go back.
Yeah. Trying to see if I saw where it said Bera represented the dominion of this world system with its appeal to the flesh. There is a reference to Ephesians 2, 1-3. Now, I don't know if it mentions Bera there, or if that's just where it's saying about how the world appeals to the flesh.
What is it? Ephesians what?
2, 1-3.
You were dead in the trespass and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, like the rest of mankind. So it doesn't name him in
Okay.
my version.
It was probably just talking about the worldly.
Yeah, I'm going back to their old ways.
Yeah.
I mean, that was nice that Abram conquered them and then was like, no, you can keep everything. I just want my family to be saved from the enemies.
Okay, a new blessing. Melchizedek had something better to offer Abraham, the blessing of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. Abraham lived by the blessing of the Lord, not the bribery of the world. He did not want anybody to think that the world made him rich. Even a small thing like a shoelace might affect his walk. Too many servants of God have weakened their testimony by accepting applause and gifts from the people of the world. You cannot be a servant of God and a celebrity in a world at the same time. Melchizedek met Abraham after the battle to strengthen him for the victory. The Lord knows the temptations we face after we have defeated the enemy. Abraham had met the Lord before the battle and promised to take nothing for himself from the spoils of victory. He was single-minded as he led his army, and God gave him victory. Abraham did not impose his conviction on his allies, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. If they wanted to take part of the spoils, that was their business. He would not criticize them, nor did he expect them to give tithes to Melchizedek. Abraham was a pilgrim and stranger, while his allies were men of the world whose conduct was governed by different set of standards. Others may, you cannot. Genesis 14:20 is the first mention of tithing in the Bible. To tithe is to give God 10% of whether of money, farm produce, or animals. The Hebrew word means 10. When we tithe, we acknowledge that God owns everything and that we are grateful stewards of his wealth. The Jews paid an annual tithe to the Lord, reference to Leviticus, as well as a tithe every third year, especially for the poor, and there's reference to Deuteronomy. They could also tithe the remaining 90% for a special festive offering to be enjoyed in Jerusalem, and there's a reference to Deuteronomy there. The practice of tithing antedated the law of Moses, for not only did Abraham tithe, but so did Jacob. For this reason, many Christians believe that God's people today should begin their giving with the tithe. A godly deacon said to me once, if the Old Testament Jew under the law could tithe, how much more ought New Testament Christians under grace? The New Testament plan for giving is outlined in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9. But tithing is a good place to start. We must be careful to give out of devotion of our hearts, not as a bribe for God's blessing. The late R.G. Letourneau, well-known Christian manufacturer and philanthropist, used to say, if you tithe because it pays, it won't pay. But Abraham provides us with a good example of giving. He brought his gifts to Jesus Christ in the person of Melchizedek. We do not give our tithes and offerings to the church, the pastor, or the members of the finance committee. If our giving is a true act of worship, we will give it to the Lord, and for that reason, we want to give our very best. In one of the churches I pastored, we did not take up offerings on Sundays, but provided special boxes at the exits before or after the services. A lad visiting church one day asked his friend what the boxes were for, and he told him, that's where we put our offerings. The visitor asked, what happens to the money? I think they give it to Brother Eastep, the boy replied. Even more perplexed, the lad asked, well, what does Brother Eastep do with it? This time, the boy was ready. I don't know how he does it, but he gives it to God. When my godly predecessor heard the story, he laughed heartily. He knew, as we all know, that each worshiper must bring his or her gifts to the Lord and give from a grateful heart. All God's people are priests and can bring their sacrifices to him. Reference to 1 Peter. Abraham was prompt in his giving. His stewardship principles were firmly fixed in his heart, so there was no reason to delay. He was also proportionate in his giving, a policy encouraged by the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians. Tithing is a good place to begin, but as the Lord blesses, we must increase that percentage if we are to practice the kind of grace giving that is described in 2 Corinthians 8-9. Abraham gave because he loved God and wanted to acknowledge his greatness and his goodness. What a contrast between the Most High God and the heathen idols. Abraham's God is possessor or creator of heaven and earth. He deserves all the worship and praise of all his people. Before the battle, Abraham lifted his hand by faith in a solemn vow to God that he would take nothing from the spoils. He had a single heart and mind as he led the army. During the battle, Abraham wielded his sword by faith and trusted God for victory. After the battle, by faith, Abraham closed his hands to the king of Sodom, but opened his hands to the king of Salem, receiving bread and wine and giving tithes. And this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith, 1 John 5:4. Then there's a note, you can study more about Melchizedek in Be Confident, an exposition of Hebrews, and grace giving is explained in Be Encouraged, an exposition in 2 Corinthians.
I think it's interesting too that like Melchizedek, he gave a free will offering where the king of Sodom was offering him to make him wealthy. And Abraham didn't fall for it. Tony Evans. Abram's daring military venture released a lot more than Lot and his family. Several kings were freed, and one of them came to thank Abram. His name was Melchizedek. Oh, I didn't realize that. Here's another thing I didn't realize. That he was one of the the one that was captured. His name was Melchizedek, king of Salem, called a priest to God Most High. Melchizedek means king of righteousness, and Salem means peace. The city of Jerusalem, for instance, means city of peace. So this person is also the king of peace. The peculiar thing about him is that he's both king and priest. Kings rule over the people, while priests stand between the people and God. No Jew ever occupied both offices. This is why the author of Hebrews says that Jesus was priest and king in the order of Melchizedek. Jesus is the true and permanent king of righteousness and peace. He is the great high priest who bridged the gap between God and humanity. Melchizedek is a prototype of the Son of God. 19. Melchizedek blessed Abram in the name of the God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. This name for God, El Elyon, emphasizes his power and might. Literally, it's a superlative, meaning God the highest. It comes up in this context because God wanted to emphasize his control. He wanted Abram to know that the kings were never in charge of the situation. He was. The kings thought they were high until El Elyon got into the fight. And when Elyon, an army of 308, with Elyon, an army of 318 can overpower the armies of multiple kings. With Elyon in your life, the kings of sin, darkness, and temptation don't stand a chance. 20. We see the first tithe here as Abram gave Melchizedek a tenth of everything. The order here is crucial. Abram only gave Melchizedek his tithe after Melchizedek had blessed him. In other words, Abram did not give to get God's blessing. He gave because he was already blessed by God. His giving was a response to what God had done. Since Jesus came in the order of Melchizedek, the tithe is still valid today as believers respond to the goodness of God in their lives. Verse 21. Apparently, the king of Sodom liked the sight of Melchizedek getting a tenth of Abram's spoils. So he moved in to cut a deal with Abram too. Give me the people, but take the possessions for yourself. In other words, he wanted to make this a 50-50 split. But the king of Sodom had been on the losing end of this battle. He was one of the captives that Abram set free. Yet he was trying to negotiate to make it look like he had something to do with the victory. I never thought about any of this before. 22 to 24. Abram responded by putting the king of Sodom in his place. He told the king that he would be keeping his own spoils, thank you very much, and wouldn't touch even a thread or a sandal strap or anything that belonged to him. Because Abram wanted to make sure the king could never say, I made Abram rich. The victory was God's, so God alone deserves the glory. This is a subtle reminder not to compromise with the world for the sake of economic or political gain. The end. Any thoughts? Anything extra?
It doesn't specifically that I see mention in the Bible, that Bera.
Wonder if that's from history. They know his name.
I don't know. See if that's
I also did not pick up that, I don't know where my brain is. I did not pick up that those two kings were rescued by God and Abraham.
I know, that's puzzling.
Like I don't know why I did what like how hard it's there. It's such a short reading, and yet I still didn't. Abram's, I guess, 318 soldiers.
that name Bera isn't even in my book of men.
Let me look up. Let me Google.
Well, in verse 8 and 9, it says, the kings of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and a few others unsuccessfully attacked Chedorlaomer and his allies as they were in the Dead Sea. And then you come over and it says, that's who. So Chedorlaomer and the other kings of the valley.
Oh, he's
the
in
king of
14
Sodom.
too. He's in 14 too.
Yeah, they came out to meet him. Like, were they captured and then they were able to come out and meet Abram as he approached
They
the
were,
camp?
the enemy had come in and had taken the town because they hadn't paid their they hadn't paid their fees or whatever
Yeah.
as a vassal. They had not paid the fees. And so then they came in and took them. And then Abraham took the 318 men and God and went and saved them all because Lot was with them, Lot and his family.
Yeah.
So then they were greeting him because he had saved them.
Okay.
But the name Bera is in 14 too. Bera, king of Sodom.
Okay, I see it now.
But I never got all of this. That I don't know. This whole story, like I've read it 1,000 times and I never got everything that I got out of it today and yesterday. And then Lot stupidly goes back again.
I just keep thinking, you need to abide in him and his word.
Any other commentaries? Anything anybody wants to add? If no, it's time for trivia. Mom, you doing trivia? There we go. All right. You ready? The Lord is my light and my blank. Whom shall I fear?
Shield.
Shield.
Filled?
Shield.
Oh, shield. No. Although that would be appropriate, I think.
Salvation.
Salvation. Very good. Cindy won. Dun dun dun. And you can find that in Psalm 27, verse 1. And we're on to another new card. Okay, this concludes the reading of God's Word for today.
Sure.
Sure.
Correct and certain.
We'll see you tomorrow morning.